Hello, everyone. Kevin Carrillo here, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast. My guest today is Peter Huson, Chief of Operations at Backbone. There's no breaks, and I'm just going to start recording if that's all right, Peter.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, no, but like you were saying, I mean, the pandemic's been an adjustment for all of us. I've said this before on the show that you can see this office has kind of been a work in progress, but this is where my wife and I work out of now. So, we have this inside joke where sometimes she'll walk in the morning when I've already been working, and I'm just kind of like talking to her like a coworker in an office. I'm like, hey, how was your week? How did everything? Would you do anything fun? So we have fun with it. We make it work.
I've been trying to get away from it. It's not how are you doing, right? It's how are you doing today? How are you doing during the pandemic is a loaded question.
That's so true. Yeah, it's a day-to-day kind of progress that we got to check up on because we're learning new things. It seems like every hour. It's crazy.
Oh, dude.
So I'm just ready for 2020 to be behind us, and I've got a positive outlook for 2021. I'm trying to stay positive with it. You have to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
avoid being, what do they call it, positivity bullies? I'm trying to balance that too.
That's right. Yeah, you got to keep things in perspective also. Yeah. But hey, for those listening, I just want to mention I have Peter. It's Huson or Huson?
Huson.
Peter Huson on. He is the Chief of Operations at Backbone, which is a fully customizable supply chain management platform that tracks the production, compliance, COGS, yields, and audit reporting data in real time for your cannabis company. So, Peter, I really want to talk to you today. I'm excited to talk to you about, data-driven insights overall and how that can empower a company, and specifically what Backbone is doing in terms of that type of technology. But before we do that, let's allow the audience to get to know who you are a little bit. From what I've read and some of the research that I've done, you're the co-founder of Northern Nights Musical Festival.
Mm-hmm.
That's a festival out of Medicinal, California. And I think what's very interesting about that is I read that in partnership with Star Hill Presents and Red Light Management, y'all have kind of paved the pathway for cannabis in future events in California. So talk a little bit about how you've incorporated legal sales of cannabis into Northern Nights Music Festival.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thanks for having me today. That is definitely, I can tell you a lot of the reason why I'm talking today has been, it really comes actually all the way back to a festival that used to happen up there called Reggae on the River, which was it's right, the properties that are involved that used to be involved as well. And we're right on the border of Mendocino, Humboldt. So half of the event used to be in Mendocino, half in Humboldt. And so,
which, for those who don't know, that's like the holy grail of like where cannabis is grown, right?
In a big way. A lot of the nation's sources over the years, and it's just a lot of the history of cannabis really started up there, and kind of I guess you could just say the back to the land movement back in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, so continues. I just want to point that out there for the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. In Northern California, it's about 3 hours north of San Francisco. And yeah, those are two major counties in the history. The Emerald Triangle, the third county involved in the Emerald Triangle was Trinity County. It started with, I was graduating grad school, and ultimately that place has a big history both for events like I was talking about in cannabis. And so we started our version of the event, which every other musical genre besides reggae, which is a good amount of options. We respected kind of the fact that reggae had been there forever, and if we get all the other genres and they get reggae, I feel that's fair.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, a lot of electronic and kind of crossover stuff was happening. And we wanted to kind of bring a new twist up to the Redwoods, with all the other kind of cool music genres, and let people explore that beautiful area. So um, over 2014, 15, 16 grew the event. I would say definitely not a profitable endeavor, but lots of fun and lots of work. Um, 2016 legalization started to really become a thing there, and a lot of the local folks up there used to support these events, right? When I say support, come down for a couple weeks, slam some fence posts, and help you build these events. They were all local growers. They just would come down, and so took a little time to get their trust and to understand who we were, right? Some city slickers coming up, trying to throw parties in their area, but you know, we all kind of intertwined and got to know each other and understand. Very tribal in a lot of ways up there. You've got growers from all over, from different areas. I'd even say you people talk about weed being from appellations. You could probably say that each of those appellations actually has groups of people who have all been working together for a very long time. So kind of unifying and bringing those people together was really what we were about. And so that evolved. 2017, the Emerald Cup really started to kind of, they had been around for a long time doing their cannabis events, in a variety of locations, both in Mendocino, the Hog Farm, which is a big Grateful Dead history. I can tell you guys, you do events in Northern California, there is a Bill Graham footprint and Grateful Dead footprint somewhere everywhere up there.
I had no idea that's where the Grateful Dead was. That's where they were from, or is that just the fan base just was really big out there?
And well, what happened was Bill Graham and those folks, there was a lot of land up there, and there was a lot of folks who were supporting them, a lot of jam band culture, etc. And so part of that whole movement, there was a lot of people who were really supporting the Dead, and um, Bill Graham really saw a huge opportunity to kind of have venues up there and be able to bring a lot of people together in those areas. And so even, you know, even he's called Outside Lands. I mean, Outside Lands, Another Planet Presents, who produces that. That's all Bill Graham Presents descendants,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
So big history. There's actually a show up there in the 80s. It was Electric on the Eel. And the Grateful Dead had a show right at the same grounds that Reggae and Northern Nights happened. So lots of history. And then, like I said, it's all local growers, right? So as legalization, I started to assist folks getting permits up there. And the biggest thing was, wow, we saw this like cannabis temporary event kind of legislation that came through, from the state. And if you kind of read between the lines there, you kind of saw that they didn't want to overstep their boundaries with the local jurisdiction. So what they said was, well, these fairgrounds are run by the state. So let's go ahead and figure out a way, with both, you know, the Emerald Cup and High Times has some stuff going on, and try to incorporate, being able to sell legal cannabis at an event. And the state said, well, the fairgrounds we own, we're not going to touch, so we'll go ahead and see how that goes. So that was kind of the first where like the idea came up, and we said, interesting. I mean, imagine if you could actually do some more pop-ups. You know, you look at these farmers markets, for example,
Hmm.
and how can we go ahead and take what they've essentially the foundation of what they built, and go ahead and see if we can put that to private property. And so that's when I worked with Sawa Ibrahim and Martin Kaufman, who actually they're very OGs in the space, as you could say, here in California. And they were really pushing, as well for the concept of being able to sell cannabis legally at events and private property. So AB 2020 was the bill that we all worked on together, to get that in place. So both, and it's funny how the kind of change of events. Northern Nights happens about a month before Outside Lands, and so we had been working in parallel on both projects. So we were helping on like the local legislation and the state legislation, because if you want something passed like this, you've got to get the local folks on board. And so I had told Humboldt County, I'd been working with them to say, hey guys, like this is coming down the pipe. You guys are writing a new ordinance. Let's anticipate that there could be this option for cannabis events. Why don't you guys include that in your local jurisdiction? So Humboldt went around and just pushed that through and said, look, if the state agrees and the property owner agrees, we'll run through it, but you're going to have to use our local event regulations, which makes sense, right? Local event regulations for sales of alcohol and all these things, they're in place. Same thing in San Francisco that we were working on for Outside Land. San Francisco is a much more they got their hands a little bit further into wanting their own rules around these cannabis events. And so essentially at the same time, we got the state pass. Humboldt had approved it. We got Northern Nights in 2019 approved for what we call the tree lounge. And so we got that approved. And then outside lands are working side by side. And then ultimately in 2019, we had 1 month after the other, the first 2 cannabis events outside of a fairground and private property. And the rest is history.
That's so cool. I love the name, the Tree Lounge. That really works. That plays.
Well, it was that the whole idea. People have been starting businesses in cannabis with names that are like, I don't want to say that I sell weed, but that was just a play on kind of the classic. Well, what am I going to declare of what we're doing here?
Right. Yeah. And that's bit a lot of people in the industry in the butt, me included, like having any type of cannabis or cannabinoid term in your name is really difficult when it comes to banking and whatnot. So just
even your class codes like NAICS, when you're going ahead and filing your EIN for your entity and you have to select what your class code is, it's like, I think I'm doing botanical.
well, big agriculture, right? Yeah.
Right. There you go.
So, hey, so that's interesting. So what I'm hearing is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of first entry into the introduction of cannabis, or even seeing, how big this industry was going to play out, was your involvement with this festival, Northern Nights Music Festival, and seeing the opportunity to sell cannabis because it was emerging due to the adult use passing in California at the time.
Absolutely. And culturally, I have to say, like, fundamentally, none of this was my idea. My partner Andrew and I, we just wanted to go ahead and throw the biggest party possible. We got that out of our system, 8,000 people, 4 nights. Like, check that box. But that was our initial intent. But when you're getting dual conditional use permits in 2 counties, and you're kind of mom said, dad said, and you're getting a lot of like the support of those rural areas saying, hey, like, we want you to bring people here for tourism and economics. Like, you start getting political, even if you didn't mean to, right? Because you're starting to, and it's always this kind of, you've got environmental impact reports and things of the nature where it's very similar to getting cannabis permits. How much water are you using? What are you doing to the environment? What are all the mitigation strategies you're going to have? But flip side of that is the economic impact report. What are all the benefits that you're going to do? How much more money is the gas station down the street making that weekend, right? And how many families does that affect?
Right. Well, and you talking about all this is kind of like a sidebar, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts. So you were heavily involved in, the whole logistical play and the whole setting up and carrying out and, producing this music festival. And when you see things like case studies like Fire Festival happen, I mean, what do you think of that? Like, how far that guy got with how much investment money and how much capital he raised? I mean, it's insane, right?
It's funny the amount of people when Fire Festival came out that contacted me and said, Peter, I had no idea why. It's like, Peter, I had no idea. Why were you were always running around the festival like so stressed out about the septic? And it's like, yeah, dude, when you're a rural area doing these types of events, and same thing goes for commercial permitting, right? Like, the amount of understanding that I have for rural septic systems now is unfathomable that I ever thought that I would understand it. But both from an event standpoint, and if you look at Fire, what was their biggest problem there is that they didn't have facilities to support the amount of people that they were going to have there.
Right.
And it's the same thing for any permitting and everywhere in those rural areas, even where across the country, right? Like, you see people there's permits getting thrown out left and right in states like Oklahoma and other places. And that's a planning permit. But ultimately, like, if I had, here's an idea for somebody out there. If you had a full database of all of the occupancy permits that have been given, which actually means that you not just got a planning permit, not just a state permit, but you've actually built a building up to fire code that you can allow people to operate. Ideal customer profile, as they say, right? It's that's an actual operation that checked all of the boxes to truly say that I'm operating here.
Right. Well, and you would think that that compliance would be in place all throughout the planning process, right? So I'm just baffled at how far he got in the process. But maybe because it was international, it was on an island.
No, you can't have everything coupled like that. It makes it way too difficult. You've got too many departments, too many things. And it would be, I mean, I guess I look at it from the applicant standpoint because you have to kind of dance in between and talk to all the people. But if you had one person looking at that holistically, which people are starting to do, that's a long line of check boxes because they won't even review certain things. So I would say like the decoupling of things, you could even you could look at that from like a political standpoint, always right from like federal oversight to state oversight to local oversight. There is benefits from just an everyday person trying to build a house or trying to do something to say, hey, like these are the things that I'm doing right for this. These are the things, and the decoupling actually allows for a little bit more fluidity in the process, where if you had this kind of overlord that understood every single piece that you have to check, nothing would get done.
Yeah. I mean, that just goes to being a good leader and knowing when to effectively delegate tasks, right? You can't do it all on your own. You got to have a solid team around you that's going to help focus on certain elements of that process to carry them out, right?
Yeah, and allow people to kind of get them done in stages is what allows people to do, right? Any project is going to have 50 check marks. You could have 10 with each department, and just allow people to say, hey, I can afford to do these things right now, so I'm going to get them done. I can afford to do these ones, and then you can stage them, and it makes it economically feasible for people to actually get things built.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a really great segue because for those just listening, Peter's talking about compartmentalizing and workflow processes and understanding, and it kind of speaks to the organization and the software technology that Backbone provides, right? Which is really data-driven insights to allow their customers to be empowered by making more informed decisions about their business operations, right? So let's talk about how important data-driven insights are, especially when it comes to the cannabis industry, and then let's talk a little bit about what Backbone does specifically.
If you don't mind, I'll take you one step before then, which is the actual capture of the data, right? I could talk for hours about all of the beautiful reports and insights and how you're going to be profitable from data, right? We'll get there. But first and foremost, right? I like to use the word boots on the ground in a very big way here. If you look at the cannabis industry and all the folks that have been involved, it all starts with the boots on the ground. Who is doing the work day in and day out, and the workhorses in your organization? Those are the people, number one, who need to be respected the most. Number two, who need to be listened to because they actually might have the most experience, but they may not have the most experience of writing it down.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's the meeting of the old school and the new school of cannabis.
And what you're referring to is basically documentation, right? Effectively documenting insights that you're getting so that you can use them later on.
Oh yeah, it's right now. It's in everyone's head,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or it has been. And in a new industry, getting this information on paper is first step. That's not scalable. How do you then get something into a computer or a database that people can start to document what they're doing on a day to day? And so that's fundamentally where this all came from, was how can we empower operators to have a tool that makes a little bit more sense to them, that mimics them a little bit more on what they're doing, and they say, hey, like, take ownership, right? This is my data flow. These are my processes. And if you can empower the boots on the ground, so this is like the bottoms up approach, what I'm getting at here, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. No, it does.
So, and that's really where a lot of this came from. And this has been done in other industries, right? If you look at just in general technology, you look at some of these kind of more robust business systems, ERPs and other systems, they all try to tie everything neatly in a bow and present these beautiful reports so everyone can understand what's going on, how the business is doing. But everyone uses the word garbage in, garbage out. You have the most magical reports and the most expensive software in the world, but if your operators are like, great, I'm not going to use that. Here's what I did today on paper or on a spreadsheet, then you're still having the same data entry problem. But I mean, it's a step in the right direction. So that's really where this came from, is how do we solve for this kind of operators who are feeling overwhelmed without overwhelming them, and kind of empowering them instead.
Okay. And so when you talk about the data collection process and how that is the first and foremost, that's the most important, is that one area where Backbone differentiates itself because it can intake that information in different formats in different ways?
Yeah, in an operator friendly facing situation where the operator understands why it's important to them. They had some say, and I don't want to look at that spreadsheet, but I want to look at this because this represents what I'm doing today. So that's really what it comes down to, is first and foremost, constructing a flow of process steps, whether from cultivation to any really kind of process throughout the supply chain, giving an operator essentially a screen, if you will, that says, this is mine. I like putting information in here because it makes sense to me. Now you've got live information first and foremost, which is a new concept, because you could have a stack of spreadsheets and logs that you input at the end of the month, but then you're making decisions month by month instead of day by day. So that's one. Two, then if you've got all of your operators all putting information in the same place, how do you make some sense of it so that your C-suite and your management can get a little bit of insight what's happening? And so that's been really where Backbone has focused on. There are great systems out there right now, and I would say that are probably further developed than Backbone from the standpoint of they've built some infrastructure on the back end of things, but the operator is not going to use them. And so we really took this kind of reverse approach. Not reverse, it's been done, and our CEO and folks have experience doing this, but how do we make something that's a little bit more usable, easy on the eyes, for lack of a better term, visualizing what's happening, and then going ahead and building the rest of the back end based on this kind of operator centric focus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can relate, because I mean, in my line of work, social media marketing, I own my own agency, KC Consulting, and in the past 10 years, I've kind of seen these insights companies that, like you said earlier, they're just kind of beautiful reports, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
to actually capture informative data it's very kind of basic in some regards. We're really not getting there yet. I know one example of when I say we're not getting there is language processing, right? And the the way in which an algorithm can decipher between sarcastic or slang terminology. So, oh man, that's bad. Like, say some people say that's bad, like that's a good thing, right? So the computer and the system understanding those types of nuances and whatnot. So how effective is Backbone's technology in terms of, I know that it's really operator friendly, but in terms of kind of personalizing insights, is that really what it focuses on step two, or
I would say, yeah, absolutely. The automation almost, right, is what you're talking about, going that direction. I would say that we're not quite at the stage yet where a farmer can go ahead and leave a voicemail and say, this crop is fire. And then all of a sudden you've got a bunch of potencies that go in there. We're not quite there yet, right?
right? Well,
But
the whole industry is not there yet. So yeah, that's not just Backbone's problem. We're getting there.
we're getting there. But, right, simple things like a voicemail that says, hey, I've got 2,000 plants in the ground. They're cut up by this amount of strains, and my expected harvest date is this. And based on last year, I expect this much flower coming down the pipe. That's a great starting point for someone downstream who's looking to potentially buy your material.
Right. And so with that example specifically, are those insights and based off of prior data that's been input, like you said, from last year, and replicating the same type of process in what you did? Or if you have data that's related to the strain and what you're working with in terms of pH levels and water, does the system also predict what you should be getting in terms of yield based on?
It all starts, what's your ground zero, right? What do you have to work with as last year, right? Oftentimes that data doesn't exist yet. So I think fundamentally we're trying to get a baseline right now. Everyone's got to understand, as industry, we are still in diapers. We're 2 years old in California, right? And so baseline, right? Let's get a baseline for what's happening. It could be some information from a farmer that told us how it went. It could be some strain information of how things are going. But ultimately, a lot of this, like I said, that baseline information still is living somewhere in space. So trying to gather some centralized information, and a lot of this started, right? So during that festival time, I started to help people get permits in this industry. And I can tell you that, and anyone who is involved in early getting permits for folks in this industry will tell you that it's not just getting a permit. You immediately start getting into EINs and do you have what do you want to use for accounting and all of this business infrastructure that folks haven't necessarily had to do. So what that lends itself is very quickly you'll find yourself was a consultant, now I'm somehow an operator because I've entrenched myself so much into this thing.
Mhm.
So 2016, 2017, right? The classic way this used to go down before manufacturing and processing of extracts was a thing, right? It used to just be flour. As soon as that started to kind of come up a little bit into the kind of the limelight, if you will, you would do splits with manufacturers, right? And what that was you don't have the cash to pay me. I've got a bunch of trim. So why don't we do an exchange where I'm going to go ahead and give you all my trim, you extract it for me, I get half and you get half.
That split that you're talking about is happening right now. I mean, it still happens in Texas. We're in our first year of growing hemp, and I've heard of that happening. So yeah.
It's a big thing to alleviate kind of having to have the cash up front. And so, but when you're doing something like that and you realize very quickly that there is a lot of trust in the fact that if that was actually 50% that you got back, that's a full trust. And so that's what really triggered the concept. Was a lot of the legacy softwares and systems in cannabis were all cultivation centric. And if you look at it, Colorado 2013 14, I've got my dispensary and I've got my grow in the back. So I'm going to tag all my plants, I'm going to record my weights, and then I'm going to package them and put them on the dispensary floor and sell my medical. And that's what those systems were built for. Even metric, these systems were cultivation systems. And so in that split example that I was telling you, it was like kind of a light bulb for all of us went on, which was, wait a minute, there's nothing built for the center of the supply chain from harvest to final packaged good. Cannabis is an incredible plant in the amount of different forms it can take and the things that it can be created out of it. So, but there's nothing tracking all of those different ways that it can be, and you know, all the way from, you know, hempcrete and things like that. There's so many things that can be created, but there was nothing built custom to track this very unique plant that's got this many ways to kind of be manufactured and processed and fractionized in different ways. So that's kind of where the light bulb came in. And so that I'll stop there. Do you got any questions before I keep going?
That's a huge light bulb because I mean I say this quite a bit is the opportunity when we look at the industrial hemp market, and you talked about, you know, hempcrete and all the other applications for fiber and herd, like textiles and ethanol and, you know, biofuel, all this kinds of stuff. It's amazing. And so that is a huge light bulb moment, because you're not only thinking, like you said, traditionally from the cultivation side, but now you're thinking, wait a second, this plant, cannabis, has a lot of different uses and a lot of different applications, and really there's no waste from the plant. So let's effectively, you know, create this software that tracks every component of the plant depending on what part of the supply chain it falls under, right?
With a lens of how am I giving my farmer some information back on performance. The how it's always been done is it's a price point, and it's fire, and it's a price point, and that's the information they got back. And they said, I killed it last year because I got 1,800 a pound for my outdoor. Right? Not that doesn't happen anymore, but we can talk about the glory days.
Right.
Um, but that is the only performance metric they got back. But what if the farmer said, wait a minute, this strain did really well in CO2. Why did it do really well in CO2? And that's not just the strain. It could be their appellation that they grew in specifically that says, under these conditions, under me managing it, and guess what? That this strain grown at my farm gets me the highest dollar value in the CO2 extracts market. So shouldn't someone tell that guy to keep doing that, so
Right.
that we can continue to kind of move and give people the insight? So that just so back to that split example, I was just like, is there some sort of report that's promising back this 50%?
Right. How do
And
I
that's,
know? Right. How do I
how
know?
do I know?
Yeah. Right.
And so, yeah, that was the light bulb. And then, you know, luckily for us at that time, we didn't have to go out and solve this as a bunch of operators and folks. Is we had strong connections with Silicon Valley. A lot of folks at that time were, you know, cannabis was becoming popular. A lot of people had made some good money in the tech industry, but wanted to go see what was going on in the cannabis industry. And so our CEO Rajesh, he used to be head of analytics at a company called NetSuite, which of course is now Oracle, one of the first kind of major ERPs. And he had really wanted to kind of do this process management MRP system for live data capture back in those days. But they said, no, we're going to third party that. It's not something we're going to focus on here. So we caught him at the same time that that light bulb went off for us. We said he was actually had sold his company to LinkedIn and had done so. And he was not necessarily looking for another project at the moment. But when we told him that, hey, we're talking manufacturing, it's a growing, and he kind of couldn't help himself almost to come in and say, let's go talk to operators. And so that's what I respect the most about this team and the people that we've been doing, is that this is not a bunch of tech guys sitting trying to imagine what might be happening. For everyone thinks Backbone's new. I mean, we've been around for almost 3 years now, but the first 2 years, what we've been doing is we've been around talking to operators and just hearing them out, right? And a lot of really good technologists, they're what they are is therapists, right? They sit there and they're so good at listening. They're so good at asking you, because what do we always say? That the customer is the expert at the problem, right? So stop going and trying to solve for all the solutions and giving solutions. Is no, just hear from the experts of the problem, all of the problems. And if you can get good at that, which I'm still trying to get good at, it's this therapy for the operator because someone's hearing them, right? And at the same time, they're like, whoa, someone's hearing me, and they're going to go work on things, and they're hearing that from other people like me in other places. And so that's kind of why this has kind of come to where it is today, where we've been very product centric, but very operators like, talk to us, like, let's hear more about what's happening. And so it's an ever evolving process, and we still got a long way to go, because as I bet the problems that are going on in Texas hemp right now are far different than the problems that are going in THC Humboldt.
Right. And
But
that,
there's probably some similarities.
right. And that's, that brings up a good point, because I was going to say, it sounds like you're really specific right now on the California market, right? Of course, there's probably plans to expand outside of California, but you guys are hyper focused there first.
We started here, but actually we are in Kansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, Colorado, Montana. Yeah, maybe even Alabama soon. So we're all over the place.
Yeah, so you got a pretty large footprint at this point. So yeah, I mean, we need to definitely get you guys into Texas and see what problems are unique to us as opposed to some of the
Yeah.
you're operating in. But Peter, I want to touch on, so first off, it's invaluable that you have, like you said, your CEO coming from NetSuite, which was acquired by Oracle. And then I think I even read that some of the other members of your suite came from like Intuit, which is an owner of like TurboTax and other software.
QuickBooks.
Books, right? Yeah. So having that background, you know, from a leadership perspective is awesome, right? And so how is it that what would you tell cannabis companies currently operating, like how could they be more efficient in their operations now, even if they're not currently leveraging a great software platform like Backbone?
It starts with understanding, right? Is your, for example, is your intake person, or let's say your graveyard shift, right? Are those guys and your C-suite, is everybody on the same page in terms of what the goals of this operation are? What are the key metrics that are interest, right? Or are they kind of, has the graveyard shift never met a C-suite member before, right? And they just come into work, they do their job, they write down what they're supposed to, and they get out. And, you know, but that would be first and foremost, is what is the kind of unification right now as an operation? Is everyone on your team on the same page, right? That's where I would start in any business for that matter. What you find in cannabis, because there's such different backgrounds and all of these non-cannabis folks and business folks coming into the industry, then you've got industrial places like Texas in the South, where people are flipping their old crops into hemp right now. So they're all good, they're all great farmers. They have been farmers for years, but they got a new finicky plant that they're dealing with, right? And so are those pieces, are at least people talking to each other, right? Like communication, are people all on the same page at what's trying to be accomplished here, and what are the important pieces so that everyone can be a little bit happier and get a little bit, I don't know, of that dopamine hit that they did a good job. Well, what did they do that was so good, and why was it so good?
Right, right. It's such a good point that you raised in terms of you got these non cannabis professionals entering the space now, and you know, their priorities may not fit with some of maybe the legacy you know, cannabis employees or people within the industry have been doing for some time. So communication is key, and I love that example you gave about how developers are really kind of just therapists because they're listening to the operators. And I know from experience, you know, working in the startup side, is that if you're ever developing an MVP or a minimum viable product, right, you start out, or even a prototype, you start out with something small where you're trying to address a particular issue or trying to solve a problem. But the only way you get better and you build upon that prototype is to get consumer feedback, right, and to have people use your platform or share with you their pain points when it comes to data collection or data entry. And then from there, after you hear those problems and you've surveyed a lot of people, that's when you can improve on the product, right? You kind of implement more features and more functionality to get to where you need to be. And that sounds like the approach that y'all have been taking since the beginning.
Oh, absolutely. And maybe to our detriment, right? As of now, right, we're just starting marketing 2.5 years into our system. It's all been a word of mouth, right? And so, but that word of mouth has come because people are telling each other, hey, there's these really good therapists that come and they listen and then they come back with something that helps. And so that's been a really solid approach thus far. Now we feel very confident in our ability. And I'm going to tell you, like, frankly, that it's not just software, right? Like ultimately, you've got to come in with this lens of, sure, I've got software, but your software is not always going to solve every single pain point. And so your ability to listen to those things carefully and say, hey, this one thing that you're talking about that's actually a pain point, Backbone might not be the right solution for you, but guess what? I've got a really good channel partner. I've got a really good solution that will, in whether in tandem or just here's the solution. And the amount of kind of respect that you'll get, and maybe this is the consulting kind of aspect of this, which is someone will remember when you were honest with them and told them, hey, this is not the right time for this solution. Here's something that'll work for you now. But that's trust that you're building right there, because you said, I'm not just here to kind of try to get you for your money. I'm actually trying to help you solve your problem.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not always the software that's going to do it. Sometimes it's just talking. You need a, similarly, right? I look back on consulting. I should have been getting permits for weed and should have had a lawyer starting entities,
Right.
right? But it's like making that distinction.
Right. No, and it's so important. Like, you know, like you said earlier, this industry is so new, and we're basically, like you said, we're in diapers at this point. And so, why not help, you know, your fellow colleague or peer within the industry? You know, if it's a solution that you necessarily don't provide, and you can refer them to someone to where it could help them address that pain point, then that just further builds trust. You know.
And builds a culture of what this industry has been for many, many years. Like everyone's got to remember that, right? That there's a lot of culture and a lot of depth here that's been around for a long time. And so just because you're a software provider doesn't necessarily mean you're any different than the guy who's got the new nutrient mix that's organic and that works really well, right? But it's healthy competition on all sides. But I think it's sometimes, even just speaking with you right now, it's kind of a reminder of the fact that this is a unique industry, and that you got to kind of, reputation is still everything. I know that people say that in business in general, but in this cannabis industry, in a major way, reputation. And if you sell a bill of goods that's not quite what you said it was going to be, it can be challenging. It can hurt you as a company.
Yeah, and sadly, that is apparent, and you have to be careful, especially, you know, in this industry, because there are obviously a lot of good players and good actors, but there are also a lot of bad actors also right now, you know, with the lack of FDA consumer oversight. There's a lot, it's the Wild West right now, you know, and a lot of people are selling snake oil, low quality products that, you know, have really low amounts of CBD or THC, or have none, you know. So it's important, like you said, to do the right thing, especially right now that we're at the forefront, to really set the tone for the culture of the industry.
And prove it. I mean, that's the other thing, right? I always laugh because an operator doesn't want to stick up for himself with the C-suite sometimes, right? And you want to say, I don't want to weigh that. Like, it doesn't matter. It's just butane. And we always say, hey, dude, like, instead of not saying anything and just being frustrated, just like record the hell out of that step and just show him what a waste of time that was, right? And that's like going back to the empowering of the operator to say, hey, you have some good ideas, put it on paper, tie the test results to it and prove it, right? And if you can give an operator and empower them the opportunity to prove to their boss that they were right, like it's a I don't know, it's a cool thing to try to be able to do.
Well, to add to that, it's a unique opportunity again that the cannabis industry is positioned in because we're so new. So these types of processes and the ways in which we operate and communicate could totally change and be different from what we see in traditional corporate America, right? Within other industries, whether it be telecom or information technology services or whatever. I have experience working in big corporations, and the operator isn't empowered. I'll tell you that. There it comes from the top down, and it's, we're making this decision, and you could have all the insights and data in the world to show them and say, I don't know if this is the right move based off what's working here and what's not. But little to very little will those type of pushbacks be pushed through. It's ultimately what the C-suite decides, and the more, like you said earlier, that the C-suite members can talk to the operators and everyone can kind of collaborate in this effort, processes will be more streamlined. It'll be for the good of operations and how we move in this industry.
If we can show other industries, right? No other industry is regulated like this. No other industry. So if you're saying, hold on a second, we are thriving, we are the most regulated, our operators and C-suite are on the same page, like maybe like we can be an example for like and use cannabis and hemp as a tool to kind of show what's possible. And I think that comes with any kind of emerging industry. It's probably a lofty goal, and I'm not going to get too high on that horse yet, but it's something that we can look at. And that's in anything brand new like this. It's got this much money flowing into it and this many eyes on it. Let's use that.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely something to aspire to, and it's something. It's a good goal to set, and I think that we, as an industry, proved ourselves during the pandemic. I mean, at the last minute, I know, especially in California, cannabis businesses were deemed essential, and that was a quick flip. I mean, these cannabis companies needed to pivot and move very quickly to adhere to the standards and the health protocols that were put in place to operate during this time, and everybody rallied. And there was a lot of even giving back to the cannabis industry community itself. So I was really proud of what I saw, and I know that others in the industry were. So we just need to kind of carry that mentality on to these different goals, I think.
Yeah, in a weird way, it's like public health officials like wearing masks and hairnets and not breathing all over your products. They're like, this whole thing has been like, see, this is what we wanted you guys to do in the first place.
It's a little ironic, right?
It very much is, but at the end of the day, it's established some protocol that they were all trying to do anyway.
Right, exactly. And cannabis is one of the leaders doing it. And so that's a win for us. We'll take it.
For sure. We'll take absolutely.
Yeah. So, hey, Peter, let's talk a little bit about, speaking of the pandemic, let's talk about some of the insights regarding the supply chain during this pandemic, and what can we expect in terms of insights in 2021?
Man, I just had a good conversation about this the other day. Now, it's, I'd say on the THC side, things have stayed somewhat consistent, if not better, during the pandemic. I would say on the hemp side, and probably just because it's not even pandemic wise, just because of what happened with the DEA over the last couple months and them coming down on things. Um, that's hurt, but it's also created a lot of creativity. I think that people have had to realize that, whether it's terpenes, fractionizing terpenes, minor cannabinoids, you see those kinds of prices is what happening. So I think what the pandemic has done is actually maybe even help folks kind of take a step back, look at what's important, look at the market, and pivot to potentially getting a little bit more creative in what the opportunities were, instead of the pandemic in general has kind of checked everybody for a second, right? And so I think what we've seen for sure is people have actually stopped a little bit to kind of think about, hey, like I've got a moment right now to reevaluate how I'm doing these things. It's not the hamster wheel. And so I think maybe you could say that the pandemic has gotten people off the hamster wheel for a second and taken a hard look at what they're doing, why they're doing it, what is their ROI on what they're doing. And so I would say in general, without getting too detailed there, that would be the best answer to that is cannabis, because it's been deemed essential and they've been continuing to go to work, but it's also really kind of giving people an opportunity to step back and say, how can I be more efficient in what I'm doing, especially when I can't have that many people on site at once? How do I maximize the amount of productivity that I could have with a minimum staff? And that's what people you always would expect to be doing that in business anyway, but it's very hard to just all of a sudden say, today I'm going to maximize my productivity across all of my operations.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a good, it's one of those pandemic pros that we've talked about it before where, of course it was a struggle for business owners in a way, but it was also at the same time, probably a good thing, like you said, to kind of reevaluate your operations, cut costs where they're not needed, and just, operate more efficiently.
Yeah, I mean, it goes for cannabis. It goes for spending more time with your kids at home. Now that people are doing across the board. So yeah, I'd say that's been the biggest thing. And creativity, I think that's the other thing that people have had to do during the pandemic is just get creative,
Yeah.
right? And when people have to be creative, oftentimes good comes out of that because new ideas get formed and new thoughts about what they could be doing. And yeah, so absolutely,
Yeah, I think that one of the most creative things, in my opinion, that's come out of from the cannabis industry this year was Delta 8.
exactly,
Right.
exactly.
I mean, that's one of the coolest stories that I've ever heard. Oh yeah, okay, well we're gonna stay within the point three, right? But it's hemp derived THC, and that to me was pretty cool.
And it, I mean, it's going to lead into what I think we're all gearing up for. I mean, I looked at the map. If you look at the map after this election the other day, it is a pretty green country right now. If you look at all of the states that have legalized, even just decriminalized, South Dakota was the last one that hadn't decriminalized, and now they're fully green,
Mm.
right? So you can look at, and libertarians and other folks, you can kind of look at it both ways, where some folks don't want federal legalization because it's really empowering the individual states to do what they want to do. um, and you got to realize the federal government getting their hands in on this is going to be some interesting, we'll see who the distributor there is, I guess, is where I'll leave that conversation, that point. um,
Right. We got the thing is that before we try to predict what can happen, we got to take these wins as they come, right? and
yep,
and just kind of sit back, take it for what it is, and then move on and adjust and work within the parameters or the cards in which we're dealt. No,
yep,
no one can predict the future, and but right now, all, as you said earlier, all signs are pointing to it's a green country right now. This election has proven that there is overwhelming public support, and ultimately it's a bipartisan issue politically. So I think once we get past the presidential election, we find out who's won. We're going to really start to see some policies and some deregulations or deschedulings take place, hopefully.
and do we have enough baseline data to make our case, right? And I'll kind of pull this back to what I was talking about, that baseline of the farmer understanding what they did that year, that things went so well. Well, can each state, do you have, and I would challenge any operator out there, if you were going to look at your 2020 right now, what metrics and what data and what are you going to look at to say, what am I going to do better in 2021? You got 6 weeks left to try to get some baseline. I think that's really, from a backbone side, that's what we're really trying to get to people is, hey, before you get into those magical reports that you're wanting, that's going to tell you how much money you're going to make in 10 years, right? Do you have enough data to get you into 2021 right now to make the right decisions? And I think that's kind of full circle to what we were talking about, right? Do you have enough baseline right now to continue marching forward and not blowing cash?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great place to leave our audience with, and to kind of marinate on is, what are you doing to prepare for next year, and what insights are you gathering to make those informed decisions? And that's Backbone's kind of core competency, right? So Peter, where can people find Backbone in terms of like websites, social media, things like that, if they want some follow-up information?
Go to backboneiq.com on our website, and then you'll go ahead and find us on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome. Well, hey, is there anything else you want to leave the audience with before we sign off here, Peter?
Stay strong. We're all in this together, and appreciate everyone for taking the time to listening today.
Awesome. Hey, well, I appreciate you being on, Peter. I really enjoyed talking with you, man. I want to have you on real soon, okay?
Likewise. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. And thanks for listening, everyone. Bye.